The last thing Christopher Robinson heard was the echo of boots stopping outside his cell, then silence where an answer should have been. It was 2008, deep inside Rikers Island, a jail complex so large it functioned like a city, and so chaotic it devoured people without notice. Robinson wasn't serving a sentence. He was a detainee, waiting. Waiting for court. Waiting for movement. Waiting for someone to remember his name. In a place like Rikers, waiting could be more dangerous than any conviction. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. That morning, the unit was already tense. Fluorescent lights flickered like they were tired of watching. The air smelled of disinfectant layered over something older, sweat, metal, frustration. Officers moved through the tier with practiced indifference, radios crackling in clipped codes only they fully understood. Inmates pressed faces to cell doors, reading the day the way sailors read weather. Something felt off. When Robinson was found unresponsive in his cell, officials moved fast, but not in the way you'd expect. The initial report was clean. Too clean. Natural causes. Possible self-harm. No signs of struggle. Case closed before questions could form. Another statistic absorbed by Rikers' long history of quiet endings. But the jail had a reputation for swallowing truth. For years, Rikers Island had been accused of excessive force, delayed medical care, and paperwork that never quite matched reality. Deaths happened. Investigations stalled. And the system moved on. Inside the unit, the story sounded different. Other detainees whispered about shouting earlier that day, raised voices that didn't sound like routine orders. They talked about officers entering Robinson's cell more than once. About time passing. About a medical response that came late, or maybe didn't come at all. In a place where time is counted in head counts and meal trays, those missing minutes mattered. Paperwork told one story. People living on the tier told another. As administrators locked down the narrative, small inconsistencies began to surface. Surveillance cameras that should have recorded the corridor were suddenly unavailable. Logbooks showed entries written out of sequence. A medical timeline that didn't line up with witness accounts. Each detail alone meant nothing. Together, they formed a shape no one wanted to acknowledge. Rikers had rules, spoken and unspoken. You didn't question your partner. You didn't contradict the supervisor. And you didn't reopen a death that had already been labeled routine. Christopher Robinson became a problem not because he died, but because the story of how he died wouldn't stay buried. By the end of the day, his name had been filed away, his cell reassigned, his death reduced to a line in a report. But somewhere between the locked doors and the sealed files, the truth was still breathing. And someone, quietly, had started to notice what didn't add up. At Rikers, silence wasn't empty, it was enforced. After Robinson's death, the unit returned to its rhythm, but the mood shifted. Officers spoke less on the tier. Supervisors lingered longer. Doors stayed closed just a beat too long. Inside the jail, rumors traveled faster than paperwork, and this time, they didn't fade. Inmates began comparing notes and fragments, through vents, during meals, in the brief seconds when doors cracked open. Multiple people described the confrontation hours before Robinson was found. Raised voices. Commands that escalated. The unmistakable sound of distress. One detainee said he heard Robinson begging for medical help. Another said officers came and went, radios silent, movements hurried. No alarms. No urgency. Just control. Official records told a calmer story. Logs showed routine checks. Medical notes suggested timely response. But the margins were messy. Times overwritten. Initials missing. Entries added later, as if the day had been rewritten after it ended. Even by jail standards, it looked rushed. Inside the staff hierarchy, pressure moved downward. Line officers were reminded, casually, repeatedly, how reports should look. Supervisors corrected language before it reached investigators. words like altercation became interaction. Delay became assessment. It wasn't a meeting. It wasn't an order. It was understood. Rikers had long relied on that understanding. The jail's internal culture rewarded cohesion over clarity. Challenging a report meant challenging your own unit. And at Rikers, isolation wasn't just for inmates. Officers who broke rank found themselves reassigned, scrutinized, or quietly sidelined. Careers ended without official reason. Medical staff felt it too. Requests for clarification went unanswered. Records were finalized before questions could be asked. One timeline showed care delivered before Robinson was even discovered unresponsive. Another listed vital signs that no witness remembered being taken. Errors happened, but not like this. Not all in the same direction. Then came the cameras. Corridor surveillance that should have captured movement outside Robinson's cell was suddenly unavailable. A malfunction, according to reports. A coincidental blind spot during the most critical window of the day. In a facility layered with security, that absence spoke louder than footage ever could. As internal investigators reviewed the case, they ran into closed doors. Requests were delayed. Evidence was incomplete. Interviews were brief and carefully worded. The death remained classified as non-criminal. No officers were disciplined. No supervisors flagged. The system protected itself with precision. But outside the walls, pressure was building. Advocates began asking questions. Attorneys noticed discrepancies. Journalists requested records that didn't align. Each inquiry forced the jail to respond, and each response revealed another inconsistency. The more officials insisted nothing was wrong, the more obvious the gaps became. The story was no longer just about Christopher Robinson. It was about how easily a death could be smoothed into paperwork. How many hands it took to make the truth disappear. And how fragile the official version really was. Then one internal document surfaced, unfinished, never meant to leave the building, and it changed everything. The document wasn't dramatic. No confession. No accusation in bold letters. Just a draft, an internal incident summary that didn't match the final version. Times were different. Actions were reordered. A key line had been removed, use of force prior to medical distress. That single omission cracked the entire narrative. Once it surfaced, everything else unraveled faster than Rikers could contain it. Investigators compared drafts. They traced edits. They followed who had access and who had authority to approve changes. The story that emerged wasn't chaotic, it was coordinated. Reports weren't falsified in panic. They were refined. Smoothed. Sanitized. Christopher Robinson hadn't simply been found unresponsive. He had been involved in a physical encounter with staff. Witness accounts, medical inconsistencies, and altered logs now aligned. The delayed response wasn't confusion, it was hesitation. And the silence that followed wasn't ignorance, it was protection. No single officer carried the weight alone. Responsibility diffused upward and outward, disappearing into procedure and hierarchy. Supervisors claimed reliance on reports. Officers cited training and protocol. Administrators pointed to policy. At every level, accountability thinned until it nearly vanished. For Robinson's family, answers came slowly and incompletely. Legal action forced disclosures that internal reviews never would. Depositions revealed contradictions officials couldn't reconcile. Some officers invoked memory loss. Others said they followed guidance. No one claimed intent. Everyone claimed compliance. The consequences were familiar. Policy reviews. Promises of reform. Quiet settlements. A case that exposed the machinery of concealment without dismantling it. Rikers Island continued operating. Cells were reassigned. New detainees arrived. New officers learned the same unspoken rules. The lights still flickered. The corridors still echoed. And the institution carried on, absorbing the scandal the way it absorbed everything else, by waiting it out. Christopher Robinson's death became a symbol not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. It showed how easily a life could be reduced to language. How power operated not through force alone, but through paperwork. And how confinement didn't end at the cell door, it extended into truth itself. Inside Rikers, control meant deciding what counted as reality. Outside, the questions never fully stopped. And in the space between those two worlds, Christopher Robinson's name remained quiet, unresolved, and impossible to erase. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.